So now you're back in your team room. Everybody else is kind of off on the floor doing their own thing. This is like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You have a couple hours. You know you're not going to get a new patient, and you're not going to need to present until the next morning. So you've got a lot of time to formulate your presentation. So presentation. I should correct myself. You may actually have to present if you need to staff the patient before you leave, but your big presentation will ultimately be the next morning. First thing to think about in the presentation is the subjective section. You're going to start out with identification. Our patient is a age 5-year-old or 6-year-old boy, age boy with a past medical history of asthma, presenting with 24 hours of shortness of breath, and then symptom. So I'm trying to give you guys a formula here, right, rather than writing out the specifics, but you can see, let's call him Michael. Michael is a 6-year-old boy with a past medical history of asthma, here with 24 hours of shortness of breath. Okay, so the next thing you need to do is tell the story about what landed Michael here in the hospital. You might say something like, this is a kid who has never been hospitalized, who 24 hours ago was running around or something, developed shortness of breath. He does have an albuterol inhaler. He's given that by his outpatient or his pediatrician, but he's never really had a serious exacerbation. He's just been able to control it. And so he took it yesterday after playing outside with some resolution of symptoms, but he kind of continued to have shortness of breath. And Mom brought him home. He went to sleep but woke up in the middle of the night. Again, very out of breath. Took another albuterol treatment, and this time did not respond as well. And so Mom promptly brought him to the ER. He arrived this morning at the ER at around 7 a.m. In the ER, his vitals were this. He appeared this way, and he received this treatment. And now he's here on the hospital floor. What I just did was essentially say, you need a story that includes all parts of HPI, all relevant parts, not everything that Mom told you. Also, if they're in the hospital, go ahead and include ER vitals, brief findings or physical exam, anything that happened, and interventions. Oh, and then, of course, all parts of the HPI also should include the review systems. So, was he febrile? Was he coughing, etc.? You told your story, and you're up to the point that the patient has arrived on the floor. You can kind of stray from the story, and if this is the first time you're presenting the patient, this is where you go ahead and summarize the past medical history, the family history, and the social history. Everything that's important, everything that you think your attending wants to hear, you need to say. Every time you say something in your presentation, it needs to serve a purpose. If it's being said, it's either supporting a diagnosis or ruling out a diagnosis. If it serves neither of those purposes, then think critically about it, and if it doesn't, then don't say it. It's okay to collect a ton of information and then only say a little bit, and then if your attending asks, you have that information ready. And of course, I think all medical students go through this evolution where when they start at the beginning of third year, they say everything that they collect. They list off every little piece of information, and then as they get more experience, they begin to learn what needs to be said and what doesn't. The next piece, you would move on to objective. So let's just draw kind of a blue line here to split our subjective and objective. Your objective section is going to start with, on physical exam, patient's vitals were vitals. I think, what do we say? He was temperature 38, respiratory rate 35. I think the pulse was 90. On general observation, my patient was in no acute distress, maybe playing comfortably or running around the room. Just give your team an idea, what did the patient look like when you walked in? And then you're going to list off all the specific parts of your physical exam. Keep it focused. All positives and pertinent negatives, essentially. Positives, pertinent negatives. Then after this, list off any lab findings. So, and you're going to list off any imaging findings. You know, this is the stuff that you have to go collect on your own after you've seen the patient. So just always be sure to check and see if was any imaging or labs done in the ER. Some people actually mentioned this part up here in the ER section. That's okay too. Some people are a little bit more rigorous about this, and they say that if you have any labs or imaging that were done in the ER, they should be presented here. And if you have any labs and imaging that were done on the floor, then they should be presented here. That's a good rule to follow when in doubt. And then, last but not least, you will move on to your assessment and plan. So I always just kind of do this together like that. Assessment and plan is going to start with a summary statement. So, summary statement. Summary statement will be a lot like that introduction statement that you did up here. It'll be essentially a repeat of that. So Michael is a 6-year-old boy with a past medical history of asthma here for, and now instead of saying 24 hours of shortness of breath, you can say presumed asthma exacerbation, or if you really think it's an asthma, you can just say asthma exacerbation. It's a good idea to go ahead and add a short sentence saying what you think, what evidence you have that supports or refutes that diagnosis, and if there's something else that's equally as likely, mentioning that this is also a possibility and why you think that's a possibility. But if it's pretty cut and clear case, like a lot of these are, then you don't need to bother. If your attending wants you to think about it a little bit further, then they'll definitely ask you what else it could be, and then you can answer that on the fly. So you say that as your summary statement. That's your assessment, right? So make sure that when I say the word assessment, it really does mean that it is your opinion of what is going on. You shouldn't have any pieces of the assessment anywhere else in the presentation. So you shouldn't be saying, I think that this is what's going on anywhere else in the presentation until you arrive at this point. And then now you're allowed to make all these conclusions that you've been probably dying to say up until this point. And then the next important part is the plan. So the plan, in my opinion, I like to do a list of problem. Number 1, asthma. But let's say there's something else going on that you find out a little bit later. You can say problem number 2. Let's just say the kid turns out to need some catch-up vaccinations, so health maintenance. And I'm sure you can all imagine that some of your adult patients with diabetes, hypertension, history of coronary artery disease are going to have a lot of problems. 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe more. Just for each problem, essentially just say what your plan is, or you could even say a brief assessment, but that's actually more for your note. You could just say what your plan is for that problem. So asthma, the plan would be to start albuterol treatments every 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, whatever you think is right. So you say what you're going to plan to do, and you also want to mention if you need any other diagnostic tests. So let's just say treatments and diagnostics. And then for this one, same deal, diagnostics. And you do that for every plan. And once you're done with that, you take a deep breath, and you get to listen to everybody else present now.